been in the process of called Crown Royal in looking at the royalty. And we began with King Saul. And one hates to characterize people into good and evil too quickly. But Saul was not that great of a king. On the other hand, we took a look at David. David is introduced as a young shepherd boy who, when taking care of his sheep, became very skilled with the slingshot. And he used that to protect his sheep. And so whenever the wild animals would come and attack one of his sheep, he would protect the sheep by destroying the wild animal. Later, as he gets older, he is introduced as the gopher child, and his father sends him to go take lunch to his brothers who are on the battlefield. And when he gets there, he is disgusted by what he sees. He sees all the Israeli soldiers gathered around, and there's this giant of a man that we know the story of, David and Goliath. Giant Goliath. And all the soldiers are fearful of him. And David finds it an insult to the Lord that his brothers and these soldiers are doing nothing. And he looks at it as, I have the ability to attack these wild animals who are destroying my sheep. Goliath is nothing more than another fierce animal that needs to be destroyed to protect the people. So he comes across as very confident. He's very courageous. He's very bold. He's very sensitive to the Lord and the Lord's presence and what people will think if all these soldiers are cowardly backing off. And so he proceeds with his task of getting rid of Goliath. We also know that he is a poet, and he is a musician. He plays the harp and he sings. And King Saul suffers from depression, and every time he does, David would be brought into the king's palace to play music, to soothe the king. We know that he becomes a soldier. And in being a soldier, he would be classified as the term we would use as an officer and a gentleman. He becomes king. And when he becomes king, once the dust settles a little bit, he remembers his good friend, Jonathan. His dear, dear friend Jonathan, who has died. And he says to himself, I wonder if anyone still lives from the house of Jonathan. Is there anyone that I can show the Lord's graciousness to? So he sends a servant to the home, and he finds out that Jonathan has a son. And he says, bring the son to me. And they discover that the son has been crippled, and David takes him into his home as his own son. I don't know what kind of characterization you would call that, but he certainly knows how to be a friend, and he remembers his friend with gratitude. My point is, the story starts today with the understanding that David is a quality man. The type of man you would want for a son-in-law. He's quality. Then last week we touched on a different story, and that's where David has trouble sleeping. He walks up to the roof, looks out over the roof, sees this gorgeous lady taking a bath. And he says to his servant, go check it out. Tell me who she is. And the servant comes back and says, that is the wife of one of your soldiers who's on the field and will be gone for a long time. He says to two other servants, go get her. They do, and the next verse picks up with the fact that she is now pregnant. And we went through the, ooh, there she is, to, uh-oh, what do we do now? And the question is, what does a quality man do in that sort of a situation? He begins by weaving a web of deception by inviting the husband back, hoping that if the husband's home for a while, when this lady does have a child, they can pass the child off as the husband's. And when that doesn't work, he eventually gets to the point where he has the man killed in the battlefield and dismisses the whole thing as it's war, people get killed, and he washes his hands of the whole thing. It doesn't say how many people knew this, but we do know from David's house, the servant that he sent to check it out, that person knew. The servants that he sent to bring the woman to him, those people knew. I don't know who the woman sent, but when they sent a message, tell the king I'm pregnant, that person knew. The leader of the army that David sent a note to that said, put this man on the line where he gets killed, he knew. We know about a half a dozen people knew. And we have no idea who those half a dozen people told. Would you tell your spouse, your friend, man, you know what the king did? How would you handle that? I don't think they had a Jerusalem press. Maybe. And we do know, and I learned it, interesting story, the night before I got married. My wife lived in Michigan. My family lived in New Jersey, and we had a lot of people coming to the wedding. And I stayed with an elderly couple. I say elderly couple. They probably weren't as old as I am now. But, when I was in my young 20s, they were an elderly couple. And the wife had the gift of delightful lady. But she's the type of person that could take a deep breath and talk a half hour straight without breathing. That. And I'm sitting there talking to her husband, and I didn't know either of these people. And she came in with one of those. And in the middle of all of her, I turned around to him, and I noticed two things. One, he had a hearing aid. Now, I don't have one yet, but maybe next year I will have one. But I also noticed in the midst of this, he reached up and turned it off. And when she finished, I turned to him, and he turned it back on. And he simply said to me, someday you'll understand. And I do. I understand that all of us, whether we have a hearing aid or not, have the ability not to see what we don't want to see and not to hear what we don't want to hear. And I won't ask how many of you women have accused your husband of not listening. But we don't. We have that ability. We shut it off. We go somewhere else, and we simply don't accept what we're hearing. Now, for those of you who are Republicans, you'll remember a time when the press wrote articles about our president who said he didn't see anything, he didn't know anything, was participating in full disclosure to let the world know that he had nothing to do with it. And denied. For those of you who are Democrats, you will know that we had a president who said, not me, I didn't do it. It is a conspiracy against me. People are after me. I assure you. Is everybody listening to me? I am assuring you, I did not do it. Only to discover that he did. I don't know what kind of gift you call that, but we all have that ability. So what happens to this king? And how is it handled? It says, the Lord sends the prophet to the king. And you all know I love stories. This is why I love stories. It is because of this story. A story has the ability to paint a picture. And you don't get offensive about a story. You don't get defensive. You don't try to protect yourself. You just listen to the story. And one of the prophet's roles was to defend the people of the nation. And whenever there was legal disputes, problems, sometimes the prophet of the Lord would go to the king on behalf of a family was having a dispute and explain the situation. So David goes to the king with this story. And he says, King, in one of our towns, there was a very rich man. He had a whole flock of sheep. He had herds of other animals. He had a lot of money. In the same town, there was also a very poor man. He had one little baby sheep. They loved that sheep like a pet. He would hold that sheep in his arms. He raised that sheep with the love and care that you would raise a daughter. And a stranger comes to town. And when the stranger comes to town, they didn't have Holiday Inns and restaurants. The people of the town would take care of the stranger passing through. And the stranger goes to the rich man's home. And the rich man, instead of taking one of his animals to feed the stranger, runs down to the poor man's house and steals his baby lamb and cooks that to serve to the strangers. David said, that's terrible. That man should die for doing such a thing. I never heard of such a thing in all my life. That's horrible. And the prophet says, you're the man. You see how that story just snuck up on him? And we are all able to make decisions a whole lot better for things that are out here than things that are in here. Now what? Now David knows what he did in secret wasn't so secret after all. And the lesson to us is, what we think we do in secret isn't that secret after all. We are our secrets. Then the Lord says this. If I can find my place. I have anointed you king over Israel. I have delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house. I gave you your master's wives and put them in your arms. I gave you the house of Israel. I gave you the house of Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing this evil in my eyes? We can all ask the same question of ourselves. We have been given this, and this, and this. Look at all that you have been given. Then the prophet says couple more things. One is, the Lord has taken away your sin. However, that little baby is going to die. And David falls on his face and spends 7 days on the floor pleading, not eating, pleading that this baby will live. And then on the 7th day, he hears all of the servants whispering. And he says to himself, uh-oh. Has the baby died? And they say yes. And David gets off the floor, takes a shower, changes his clothes, and wants something to eat. And all the servants are shocked. And they say, the whole time the child was sick, you were outstretched. Now that the child has died, you're up and at him. And he said, I hope the Lord would change his mind and be extra gracious to me. But now that the baby has died, I know that that child will never again come to me. However, I will return to the child. For those of you who have lost loved ones, you may find yourself saying the same thing. That loved one will never be returned to me, but I will return to him or her or whatever. That's good stuff. Right? Right? I know many of you have lost loved ones. He will not return to me, but I will return to him. The lessons are good people, good quality people, somehow have the ability to do some crazy things that we would say are totally out of character. We have done it. We have been burned by it from other people. The accent of the gospel is that God can forgive us of that. And the other reality is some of the things we do simply have consequences. We open the floodgates and things happen. Let us pray. Our Father, as we live our life, we understand how frail we are, how impure we are in spite of our intent. So we thank you for forgiving us. We'd ask that we would forgive ourselves. We would ask that you would help us find it easier to forgive others who have offended us in a variety of ways. Teach us to be a people of love and forgiveness, for we understand who you are and what you want of us. And we ask